we start with the news that the Justice Department's criminal probe of efforts to overturn the 2020 election includes an investigation of actions by former President Donald Trump. The Washington Post is reporting that the DOJ has received phone records of key Trump White House officials, including his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, according to two people familiar with the matter. And prosecutors have asked for hours, detailed questions before a grand jury, including to witnesses about Trump's pressure on Mike Pence to overturn the election and what instructions Donald Trump gave in the fake elector scheme, according to the Post, which is citing four people familiar with the ongoing probe. And on that fake elector scheme, the New York Times is reporting on previously undisclosed emails, including one from an Arizona lawyer that said, quote, "We would just be sending in, quote, fake electoral votes to Pence so that someone in Congress can make an objection when they start counting votes and start arguing that the fake votes should be counted." That same lawyer then wrote a follow-up email saying, quote, "Alternative votes is probably better than fake votes." And he added a smiley face emoji for good measure. You know, a smiley face emoji to say, this is one big joke, and we're all in on it. All of these revelations come amid growing pressure on the Department of Justice to directly investigate Donald Trump's role in the attempted coup. And as Attorney General Merrick Garland was asked yesterday by NBC's Lester Holt about the possibility of prosecuting Trump.
Look, we pursue justice without fear or favor. We intend to hold anyone who was criminally responsible for the events surrounding January 6th, for any attempt to interfere with the lawful transfer of power from one administration to another, accountable. That's what we do.
Here to break all of this down for us, Matt Miller, former special advisor to the National Security Council, also Frank Figliuzzi, a former assistant director at the FBI. And Frank, an administration official familiar with the DOJ's criminal probe told NBC News that it isn't an investigation of Trump himself, but part of a broader probe into efforts to overturn the 2020 election. So what does that mean? That they are looking at Trump's actions? Help us understand what this news all means in the context of the ongoing investigation.
Yeah, good question, Zerlina. When you put the Washington Post reporting side by side with Pete Williams' reporting that you're referring to, what we likely have here is an umbrella investigation that's called something like investigation into attempts to interfere with the Electoral College vote or to overturn the 2020 election. Probably has some code name to it. And then they're looking at multiple individuals who may or may not be criminally responsible. Amongst those individuals is likely the former president of the United States. And so in the Washington Post reporting, when we're seeing hours of detailed, specific questions seemingly focused like a laser on Donald Trump, his actions, his conduct, his words, his instructions, it's understandable to come away with a valid perception that he is amongst the potential subjects of this umbrella investigation. I would say that they're probably exercising extreme caution, maybe don't have Donald J. Trump in the subject line of the investigation yet, but it's clear from these questions that these are not just, oh, by the way questions. They are considering him as a subject.
And Matt, you have so much experience working in the DOJ and also in communications. Can you give us your read on the parallel reporting both in the New York Times and the Washington Post about what Frank is talking about, whether or not Donald Trump may be among this group, or whether you think this is a serious investigation and Donald Trump, might be worried today?
Yeah, look, I think there are two stories with probably two different sets of sources. The NBC story makes very clear it came from someone inside the Justice Department. And I think Frank makes a good point. They may not have a file with Donald Trump's name yet. He may not be the subject of an investigation. But when you have reports that witnesses are being asked hours of questioning about him, it becomes a distinction without a difference. If he's not a subject of an investigation now, if the investigation turns up evidence that he acted unlawfully, he will very quickly become become a subject of that investigation. With respect to the Washington Post story, one of the things that happens when the Justice Department moves from the secret stage of the investigation, where they're collecting evidence but not going out and actively interviewing witnesses, to this more overt phase where they start interviewing witnesses, and especially when they start subpoenaing witnesses to the grand jury, that produces leaks, not necessarily from the government, but from the witnesses who come to the grand jury, from their attorneys, from family members and friends that they talk to. And so one of the things I think we'll see, now that we know that 2 aides of the former Vice President Mike Pence have been to the grand jury, you can bet those are not the last people who will show up at the courthouse in D.C. and have to testify. There will be reporters staking the courthouse out. There will be more people talking about the questions they're asked. And I suspect we will see more and more overt reporting about what's happening in this investigation that here until now was largely kept under wraps.
Really helpful analysis from both of you. I want to turn to the specific story about the fake elector scheme and these newly released emails. Again, you guys, reminder, don't write it in an email, especially when you're trying to do maybe crimey things. But Frank, how do you see the fake elector scheme as maybe something whole and apart different from the violence that we saw on January 6th in terms of Donald Trump attempting to delay the certification? I think when you're like discussing back and forth whether or not we should use the term fake to describe the elector scheme, that doesn't sound like super legal. Doesn't sound like you're discussing something that's allowed. What's your read on this part of the story?
I've always liked this category of the investigation better and see it as stronger than the case involving the planning of violence on literally at the Capitol on January 6th. By that, I mean, this is a documents case. I mean, there are people, as you just pointed out, rightly so. You know, we've got an email chain here where lawyers are saying, it's fake. No, maybe we shouldn't say fake. We've got a recording, of course, with Trump's voice on it, calling Georgia officials, I need this number of votes, which would get me one more than we have. Look, there's lots of documentation here. That's why I've always said this is the stronger of the two angles to approach. The January 6th violence is a tough nut to crack. Why? Because we've always had this concept accurately of Donald Trump acting as a mob boss, a wink, a nod. You know what to do. You brief him on something, he gives you a smile, right? It's going to be really hard unless people right next to Trump flip, say Meadows or Bannon or Stone, and say, yep, he ordered the violence with Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. That's going to be tough. But this one, the alternate slate of electors, this is doable. I think this is what DOJ is clearly pursuing.
I've been thinking a lot about this all week long. Another thing I've been thinking about, Matt, is, you know, when I look down in Georgia and I see Fani Willis just sort of moving along, and there's not a lot of hand-wringing happening. She's just doing the thing. She's following the evidence. There's a lot of hand-wringing at the DOJ, or at least reportedly, about, you know, how far to go, how to do it, because of the significance and history involved in this investigation. Are we just overthinking it? What do you think are the real obstacles for the DOJ as they consider taking up this investigation and going all the way up to Trump? And what are some things that maybe we're overthinking?
I will say I do think some of the criticism of the Justice Department has been a little bit unfair. I know that people at the senior levels of the department have been frustrated, especially when they hear former officials like me and like Frank, who at one point were on the inside, and know that lots of times you get criticized at the Justice Department, people saying, why aren't you doing this thing I want you to do? And you are doing it, but because of the rules of the Justice Department, you just can't talk about it publicly. And so now that we've seen they actually are investigating the former president, and probably have been for some time, I think it's clear they have been fairly aggressive in this investigation. Now, in terms of the roadblocks that could be ahead, one thing the Attorney General made very clear in his interview with Lester Holt yesterday is that Donald Trump's status as an ex-president will not be an impediment to bringing charges. That's been something that's much discussed, you know, this idea that it'll turn us into a banana republic if we charge a former president. Well, he made very clear that anyone, a former president, anyone else who committed a crime is not above the law. So I think we can take that impediment and set it to the side. The remaining impediment will be the same impediment that exists for any other defendant, and that's whether the Justice Department can make a criminal charge stick. And I do think sometimes we get a little far ahead of ourselves in thinking this would be an easy case or an open and shut case. That no one has ever been charged with attempting a coup in the United States before. In some ways, this is an uncomfortable, novel place to use criminal law. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but when you look at making the charges, bringing an indictment and making that charge stick, not just through trial, but through appeal, ultimately probably up to the Supreme Court, in a very novel use of the law, that's not an easy thing for the Justice Department to do, and I think it's why they'll move very carefully and very deliberately.
It's so fascinating to hear this analysis today, and it's so important for us to understand it all. And I want to thank Matt Miller and Frank Figliuzzi for helping us with that, starting us off. Thank you so much for being here. Please stay safe. Hi, I'm Zerlina Maxwell. Thanks for checking out our channel on YouTube. You can see more from Zerlina by clicking any of the videos on this screen, and make sure you subscribe below to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. Thanks for watching.